while young professionals today have so many opportunities, the kinds of decisions they have to make, the kinds of choices they have to grapple with are extremely complicated. So we first of all believe that we actually had a unique offering, so to speak, here.
One of the things we've been super conscious about is to avoid any hyperbole, any over dramatism. Talk about stuff that really happens in both small, large, mid-sized organizations.
So the most underrated skill in a workplace.
Listening.
What's harder, writing a book or leading a team?
Leading a team, no contest. A book doesn't have egos or opinions.
Writing a book, you have to, one, feel narcissist enough to actually think that you can write a book. There's a lot more internal work in writing a book than leading a team.
So good evening and welcome to yet another edition of Thinkly Talks. Today I'm joined by two distinguished leaders, Vivek Gambhir, a seasoned business strategist with over 30 years of experience across FMCG, startups, and more. He has held key roles at Bain & Company, Godrej, and Boat Lifestyle. He is currently a venture partner at Lightspeed Venture. And Sundar Ramachandran, with over 20 years of expertise, he has led transformation efforts at Dr. Reddy's and served as country managing director for GSK across multiple countries. He is also a prolific writer on career development. Together, they've co-authored HeadStart, Unlock the Secrets to Career Success, a comprehensive guide offering actionable advice and strategies for professional growth. I'm really excited and looking forward to an insightful discussion on leadership, transformation, and career development. So with that, Vivek and Sundar, welcome to the talk.
Thank you much, Vivek. It's always good to talk to another Vivek.
Likewise. Sundar, I hope you don't feel too left out here.
Change your name.
I'll try to catch up, but thank you. Lovely to be on your platform. Thank you.
Right. Whenever I meet people who've kind of got together on a project, I mean, whether it's doing a startup, a project, or in your case, really co-authoring a book, I think the first question that really comes to me is that, how long did you know each other? How did you really trust to be on this journey? And really what inspired you to kind of get together to put this thing together? So,
Sundar, you want to go first? Yeah.
I think Vivek and I have known each other for several years now, and I think the common passion that we shared was really this desire to sort of write, articulate our points of view, and help the next generation of leaders. That's really was the common area of interest that got us together. And while we were thinking, hey, we should probably do something together. Should this be like a long form article or maybe a newsletter or a series? We thought, hey, you know what? There's enough there between our experience to codify everything into a book. So that really was the start of the whole idea, and then the whole process took about an year and a half, including all the time that you take sort of going through the publishing nuts and bolts. But yeah, fantastic experience, and great example of how sometimes the dots could get joined in ways that you don't necessarily imagine when you start a relationship. Right. So yeah.
Right. Fascinating. And, if you think about it, between the two of you, you've got so much of expertise, and which should I say experience really in consulting, in operating, being a builder. Did you ever think about writing something more in terms of, let's say, a management consulting book or an operational book or something along those lines? Why career development? Yeah.
I think one is Sundar and I had spent a lot of time mentoring and coaching young professionals. So a lot of our passion and our interests were about trying to find a way to be able to, in some ways, give back to the kind of, experiences we had benefited from. The second is we also wanted this to be a somewhat unique voice, all right? And we recognize there is so much career advisory out there, but there really wasn't anything catered towards the young professional. And as we all know, Vivek, while young professionals today have so many opportunities, the kinds of decisions they have to make, the kinds of choices they have to grapple with are extremely complicated. So we first of all believe that we actually had a unique offering, so to speak, here. This was an area which we were passionate about. And the third was common ground among, between both of us. There was alignment. And so I think for true magic to happen, all of these things, have to fall into place.
No, I agree with you about I think people who are really getting started at this time, I mean, they're going through a pretty tumultuous time, I would say. I mean, of course, in our case, it was really about limited opportunities. But I think overabundance of opportunities itself can be a bit of a challenge, right? I think what really the new generation is going through. Any thoughts on that, Sundar, Vivek?
Oh, absolutely. I think, just extending on what Vivek said earlier, which is also the gap we thought we were filling, because we are, in a sense, real world operators. So we see these career dilemmas playing out on a day-to-day basis, right? This isn't coming from sort of a place of advisory, which is not rooted in what you're
Right.
seeing in the real environment. So I think that's what we thought, we'll bring to the table. And one of the things we've been super conscious about is to avoid any hyperbole, any over dramatism. Talk about stuff that really happens in both small, large, mid-sized organizations. Things about learning, things about how do you navigate, how do you think about career moves, transitions, and then more importantly, how do you think long term? Because that's what this game is all about, right? Careers, however you look at it,
Yeah.
ability to play the long game and then get those results compounded over 10, 20, 30 years. I think that's where real impact and real magic happens, right? So we just felt like all of that would be very useful for anyone who's starting out, like you said, who's dealing with the paradox of excessive choices. So we just wanted to be that companion who can sort of handhold them and say, hey, you know what, you've got some company, don't worry, we'll get through this together.
Right. In fact, when I kind of went through the book, stuff like you said, play the long game, build steady relationships. I mean, this is really about, really, I would say, foundational principles about how to kind of build your career. It's not about really about, let's say a quick, a toolkit here or a quick toolkit there, right? And so maybe if you could, just help us walk through, the Head Start really talks about these foundational career principles, and how do you see these principles relevant to anybody, whether they're starting off a career or let's say somebody who's in the mid or the, later years of the career.
Yeah, I think, the meta framework in the book, Vivek, is what we call be your best self at work, right? So really the first navigational principle is whatever you do today is your platform to express yourself. So don't reserve your best for the next, is the first message that we're trying to relay through the book. Because often we see, we've gone through this ourselves. We all get caught up to say, well, I'm going to bring my best self when I get promoted, right? When I get that next job, when I move to another country, da da da. And that the price you pay is you're not bringing your full self to whatever it is that you're doing within your context today. So I think that's number one. What it means, what is bringing your best self to work with? We've broken that down into 6 themes. So it starts with learning, which is being thoughtful about learning. You call it an agile learner, a continuous learner, but we've sort of deconstructed that to say, what does that really mean in an enterprise context? So that's one. Then you talk about working in teams, because that's what, again, it's a long game, but then you're playing it with others. So it doesn't really matter how brilliant you are, your ability to surround yourself with other interesting people and then deliver outcomes as a team is super important. So that's a second theme. The third theme is really about, we call it being a boss magnet, but it's not not in an artificial way. We're not saying, hey, suck up to your boss. We're saying understand how value gets delivered in your context, and then stay focused on that. Because if you are focused on delivering value, of course, you're going to be your boss's favorite. All of the talk about managing upwards becomes more straightforward. Then we talk about career transitions. We've made several transitions. People in a long career will make many transitions, and there are some principles that you need to think through as you think about job moves, functional moves, geography moves, one company to another company type of move, maybe more dramatic moves, starting up on your own, going into the social sector, example. So, and you've given a lot of examples around these. The fifth theme is about being a go-getter. And at the core, if you see the title Head Start, it's really about your ability to get stuff done. So what does that mean? How do you become the linchpin in your business environment, the go-to person, so to say? We've sort of deconstructed that. And the last, and I believe the most important chapter is, we call it being a marathon runner. Is that mindset to say, this is going to last 40 years or even longer. So, there's not a lot of value in trying to be too clever and solve everything in 5 years, right? So how do you do this in a sustainable way? How do you think long term so that you have the energy? And then when you really peak in your career, you have the momentum, because you don't want it to be inverse. You don't want to be peaking in your career and finding that you're fatigued.
Right.
So how do you balance that out? So that's really the broad framework. And then within each, we've obviously shared our experiences, but what Vivek and I have also done is brought in real examples of people we've had the good fortune of working with. And we've actually given out LinkedIn IDs of these guys. So we're encouraging the
Nice.
go connect with these people. These are real folks doing real leadership roles, have conversations, folks who've made these shifts, right? What were some of the questions they had in their mind? What was their consideration set? How did they make the decision? So just making it very real so people get a sense of relatability in every team. That was the idea.
And
Lovely. I
Vivek,
think that's a very succinct, articulation of your book, and really captures the essence. Uh, Vivek, Sundar talked about this very intriguing concept called the boss magnet. And I think like the first question that comes to your mind is that what exactly is that? Because bosses love people who kind of pander to them, right? And like you talked about, really just sucking up to them. But jokes apart, just help us understand that what does it mean? Because it is an important part, whether you like it or not, of being able to manage upwards, because there are obviously, what should I say, nuances and, layers of, you could call this politics, or you could probably have a different, better term for it. But, end of the day, just help us walk us through what this boss magnet is really all about.
and Vivek, the general assumption is that bosses have to manage employees, which is true.
Mhm.
But I think one of the true ways to succeed or thrive is learning not just to let your boss manage you, but to also find a way to manage your boss. And that's the crux of the chapter that we've written. We've all heard the standard cliche that, employees don't leave companies, employees leave managers.
Right,
And I think we've realized through our experience that having a productive boss relationship can be a huge force multiplier.
right,
And an unproductive relationship with a boss can be terribly agonizing, and in many cases forces many of us to lose companies. And so both Sundar and I have had the good fortune of some amazing bosses, and we've also had the occasional boss that we wish we could have done without. But the crux of the chapter is all about, managing your boss, which
mhm,
first of all starts with really getting to know your boss. Do you understand your boss's style? Do you understand the way they work? And do they even understand their priorities? So if you don't
mhm,
understand, what your boss's mandate is,
mhm,
difficult for any of us to have a productive relationship. So the first step is about understanding the boss. The
mhm,
second part we again talk about is really making them shine. We
mhm,
always focus on making ourselves shine, but if we make the boss shine, if we help nail the deliverables for the boss, then it actually automatically, the cascading or the domino effect will actually impact us.
right,
The third is, again, there's no substitute for actually doing well. So
mhm,
if you understand the expectations, if you understand the boss's style, the best way to make a boss happy is actually just over delivering what each of us has signed up for. But what we realized is that those three things aren't enough. There's actually a method to engaging your boss. And in the book, we talk about a 2x2 stakeholder engagement plan to be very
mhm,
systematic about preparing for interactions with the boss, having a structured way to actually have those discussions. And a
mhm.
huge part of that is actually about both learning to receive and to give feedback. I
Right.
think feedback is probably one of the most underappreciated skill sets. And most people do not focus enough on the power of feedback. And so we end this section with, laying out the method in terms of, how do you actually become a far better feedback giver and a feedback receiver.
Both of you have obviously worked in, large companies, MNCs, and, worked across, various, should I say, geographies. Sundar, you specifically have, been in a leadership role across South Asia. Uh, how do you see some of these concepts really aligning when you look at the cultures, when you look at, let's say, working in India versus, let's say, Sri Lanka or wherever it is, right? What has been your thing, and how do you see, when you look at your book now through that lens, any thoughts and observation that you might have?
I think some of the first principles hold true. When you work for large MNCs, all of us who've been through similar journeys, you get the opportunity to work with stakeholders across the world, right? I think the
Mhm,
first principles of career acceleration, leadership, what just being effective means. I think those translate really well. There are, I think, the cultural nuances manifest in the form of expression. And if you don't understand it, it's very easy to either misunderstand your teams or to be misunderstood. So I think
Yeah.
that's where an appreciation of what's the tone of that culture, what's the temper of that culture, how do things get expressed, what are the ways of working, what is acceptable, what is not. I think those are the sort of things that you need to be conscious about. I mean, just to give you a very specific example, when I was in Sri Lanka, one of the mistakes I made is, hey, they're a neighboring country, they look like us. How different can they really be, right?
Yeah.
I use the same Indian management principles
Correct.
that sort of gave me success in my previous environment. And of course, it did not, right? So I didn't work, it rubbed people the wrong way. And it took me several months to realize that, hey, you know what? This is a different culture. I can't be using the same strokes.
Right.
So I think, and that is the whole idea, not all mistakes are worth learning firsthand. I mean, there's a lot of value in making mistakes through
Mhm.
HeadStart. One of the things we're trying to do is, hey, you please go ahead and make newer mistakes, but learn from those we've already made. So don't repeat those, is the message we want to give out to the next gen of leaders as well. So
Absolutely. I think we sometimes really kind of take culture for granted or sometimes underestimate the importance of understanding the culture, right? Because let's say, for example, the Western side, the people tend to be very direct about the feedback. And here it's probably sometimes a little more about, I would say, sandwich feedback that we call about getting it out. So I think it's really important to know that.
but
But
actually,
Vivek,
it's a fantastic question. I'd love to hear what Vivek has to say, because Vivek's actually managed global teams, right?
great.
Which is even more, the differences are even more
Oh, yeah.
dramatic.
Please, Vivek.
Look, I think the fundamental principles are still the same, right? Which is all about being a great team player, being a boss magnet, being a go-getter, learning how to give and receive feedback. So I think the core principles are actually fairly fungible across geographies. But as both Vivek, you and Sundar are saying, I think the context and the how becomes a little bit different. I think the what is generally quite standard across all geographies,
Mhm.
but the how does require a lot of nuances, and being able to both understand and appreciate and
Mhm.
adapt to the how is where I think the
Mhm.
challenge actually lies more than anything else. And I'll give you an example. Uh, we had acquired a business in Indonesia when I was at Godrej.
Mhm.
And we came in with this belief that it's very important to be able to create very individual incentives. And so we created, a very attractive incentive program, largely tied to individual performance. But the
Mhm.
sense of, community and the sense of we is far more in Indonesia than it's in other parts of the world. And the
Right.
incentive did not actually work. But the
Wow.
minute we made this a team incentive, right,
Mhm.
dramatic things happened as far as performance was concerned. So the power of community, the need for affiliation, the need for belonging is far higher in Indonesia than it was in India. So I think some of these things, nuances, as both of you are saying, are very important. And sometimes it does take a few mistakes
Mhm.
before we
Mhm.
realize it the hard way. But I think it's important, as you said, understanding the context is more important than anything else in these situations.
Absolutely. In fact, you've also touched upon the aspect of influence in the book. And, I think, Vivek, you've also been in a consulting role, which also means being able to really be there in the boardroom and, exert influence across, I would say, stakeholders who might be at cross purposes with each other, right? Do you want to just maybe double down on that and tell us what does it take, for a leader to be able to establish influence, have the gravitas, because not all of them have that naturally. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. See, generally, influence tends to be fairly easy if you're in a position of power, right? And then through authority comes influence, right? But most of us are not in a situation where we necessarily have the authority or power to be able to command influence. And so we have to find lots of ways to be able to earn influence as opposed to commanding influence. And to be able to do that, I think, first of all, it has to start from a position of credibility, right? If you're not credible, whether it is in terms of your delivery or your expertise, difficult for other people to actually listen to you without authority. The first step that we talk always about is the need to be able to build credibility through a track record. The second is to be able to actually find ways to communicate, because you might have amazing expertise, but if you're not able to actually build a narrative or are able to communicate effectively, difficult to build influence. The third is always trying to find ways to create win-win outcomes. Usually, if we always think about us versus them, difficult for people to fully, build trust. The third part is about building, win-win, outcomes. And then the fourth is to actually be fairly persistent, particularly when you're a younger employee. If you have a strong idea, people may not listen to you for the first time, but you have to have the self-belief, the conviction to be able to actually go in and sell the ideas through communication. And also, if you're running into roadblocks, find others. And we talk in our book about teamwork and collaboration. Sometimes you can find other people to be able to back this idea. But to me, I think, Vivek, influence along with strategic skills probably are the two biggest requirements which end up derailing people as they move to senior leaders. And we have to find a way to be able to build influence without necessarily having those titles or that formal authority.
Lovely. Sundar, you've also kind of come up the ladder pretty fast, if I may say so. Again, somebody like you, in a leadership position at a younger age, how did you kind of, anything that you want to just kind of talk about, how do you kind of exert influence and get heard?
Yeah, I think Vivek's broken it down quite well, right? I mean, if you think, the moment you think influence and all, it can get a little overwhelming, especially when you're starting out, right? Because you have less of what it takes to influence, right? But the way I think about it and the way what I try to codify for my teams is, think of currencies of influence, right? So what are those currencies? I think a simple currency is knowledge. So whatever it is that you do, whatever is your mandate, can you make sure that you are as well informed about your area of operations as anyone else's, right? Or even better. I think that's a fairly straightforward one. I think starts with that. So can you get super focused on really becoming good at your craft, becoming good at whatever it is your job within the context in which you're operating? That's number one. Number two, the currency of influence is just relationships, right? And within that, there are tools we can use, right? So for example, one of the things we talk about in the book is a simple thing called appreciation tracker, right? Which is to say, hey, don't leave it to happenstance. We're all trained to catch people doing things wrong. But how useful will it be to actually catch people doing things right? And this doesn't have to be top down. It can be peer to peer. It can be you in a moment with your boss where he demonstrates or she demonstrates brilliance, and you just giving a soft nudge to say, hey, you know what? Really enjoyed seeing you in action today. Fantastic learning for me. And then make it very specific. Say something to the effect to say, hey, the way you communicated that point of view, or the way you countered that objection, or when a senior person asked a question, the way you navigated, it's phenomenal. I mean, really, I'm so glad I was in the room. I learned from you. Now, when you make it meaningful, when you make it tangible, and you say this with authenticity, it builds relationship, right? Gives you more influence, because if you trust me, you would be more likely to listen to me, irrespective of me being a junior employee, as an example. So I think knowledge, relationship, having a toolkit of things like being mindful, tracking it. Vivek spoke about this 2x2 stakeholder roadmap. An example we give in the book, which is again to build influence down to up, is do these no agenda check-ins with no senior people.
Nice.
Right? Because often one of the apprehensions that a lot of young people have, and we've all had, is, what am I going to say? Why would, let's say someone like Vivek, who's very senior, right? Why would he give me his time of his day, right? Because we're thinking it's a one-way street. We're thinking, I'm going to ask, and ask, right? But if you just turn it around and ask the question, hey, what can I do for you? And there's always something that you can do for even the senior most people, right? But there's something that you do really well, which is your craft. Bring that to their table. Not only does it demonstrate confidence, they walk away with assurance, because they're used to people expecting something. And it'll be so refreshing for them now to see a young person coming and saying, "Hey, is there anything I can help you with? Is there a mandate you have? Are you working on something, and I can sort of take that off your plate?" Uh, you obviously will be on their calling list quite frequently. So I think there are tactical ways. If you break down influence, which is the big meta word, into actions you can take on a daily, monthly basis, it just becomes easier. And then, like everything, anything else meaningful in our careers, right? You do it consistently, it starts giving you results. Is how we look at it.
That's fascinating. I think somebody once told me that how when you look at all these meta words, they tend to be nouns, like we talk about leadership, influence, right? And the moment you break it into verbs, like actionable things, it suddenly just demystifies the whole world, right? So I think what you both just shared right now are really very interesting, simple, actionable stuff that we can do.
And by the way,
This,
that's a good note to actually, maybe surface this, right? And this is inspired because Vivek writes a very popular blog called Monday Morning 8 a.m. And
uh-huh,
he's been doing it for many, many years now. And that actually was the inspiration. That's why every section of our book actually ends with what we call Monday morning actions,
uh,
right? Which is sort of a take on Vivek's popular blog. And the
right,
whole idea is that, we didn't want just to give gyan, right? We wanted people to say, hey, you know what, go try these 4 things at work,
right, right,
right?
right.
See, some of it will work, some of it won't, some of it will feel natural, some of it won't. But at least you're better off because you've not done something.
Absolutely,
So you get some
absolutely.
feedback from your environment. If it's working for you, keep doing it. If not, move on to the next.
Right. In fact, the chat is really lit up. There are like a dozen questions, but I just want to hold it back till we just kind of cover some ground. But I think to Alicia, to your question, anything you both wish someone had told you about your career in your 20s, I think that's a great, straight away and actionable, feedback coming from, Sundar, which is about feel free to reach out to your seniors. It doesn't have to be a boss, just maybe your peers, and just talk about, how you could probably help them, engage in them, and, there's nothing really to be scared about, right? One of the things that you've really talked about, again, Sundar and Vivek, is about, a very important currency being knowledge. So of course, it's one thing to kind of build relationships, but a very important currency is about really having knowledge, which kind of earns you the respect automatically, right? Vivek, do you want to just talk about this thing that's I think been recurring out in your book about on the whole aspect of continuous learning? And what does it mean really being an avid learner really mean to you, and how can somebody really adapt that? Vivek?
And, uh, many people assume that learning ends when you graduate from university, right? The reality is, given the way things are changing, and we all know the significant impact AI and other things can actually have on careers,
Mhm.
uh, learning actually has to almost start in many ways, even after you've finished, college, just to remain relevant. And learning is a muscle. Learning is a muscle that you have to keep on building over time. And many people talk about the importance of learning, but then you ask people, what have you done? Oh, I never found time. Right. And so the busyness becomes the biggest excuse for not being able to find time to keep learning. And so I think for us, one of the most important ways to remain relevant in an ever-changing world is the ability to not just learn, but learn how to learn. And we have a lot of tools in the book, which
Mhm.
one of them is about creating a to-learn list. So if you can have a to-do list, why not actually have a to-learn list about the kind of things that you actually want to learn? Sundar has always talked about the importance of having a learning SIP. So we all talk about investing in SIP, but the biggest investment we can make is on ourselves. All right. And
That's
if
right.
you truly believe that, why not create a learning SIP? And it's not just about, obviously, there's lots of opportunities to learn through podcasts like this. There are courses one can take, which are both online. There's corporate training offered. But there's a lot of learning that can happen through stretch assignments. And we sometimes underestimate the willingness for people to just raise their hands up and actually learn through taking on stretch assignments. We also talk about the need to create a personal learning network. There's so much learning that can happen through peers, You can learn through mentors and coaches. And ultimately, it's very important to put this into a framework. And we have a framework which again Sundar developed called
Mhm.
the LDST, framework, which is about learning, doing, sharing, and teaching. And so
Mhm.
the idea again about learning is that if left to itself, nothing will happen. But if we truly believe it's a priority, it's important to actually have a systematic approach, which the book tries to lay out.
Right. Sundar, Vivek just talked about, this continuous learning, especially in an environment where AI is coming and disrupting things, and we just have to stay relevant. I mean, I think the day you graduate, you're already probably in some ways outdated because our syllabus anyway is always struggling to catch up with what's happening in today's time. Uh, any thoughts about what people in the starting of their careers right now should really be focused upon about staying relevant? In fact, we are really going through a time when we don't even know what's going to happen over the next 7 to 10 years with the job displacement, what's really happening through the AI and automation. So any thoughts on that, Sundar? And then Vivek would love to hear your thoughts also on that.
Yeah, I think the way we think about it is, with learning specifically, I think trying to be too longitudinal actually doesn't really work, right? Because, like you said, if you try to look 5 years out and think about what technologies should I learn today, or what framework should I learn today that are going to be hot in 2020, 2030, as an example, I mean, we'd be all fooling ourselves, right? So I think the way to
Right.
think about it is we've broken this down into pick out a knowledge area which is relevant today and maybe one that's sort of on the adjacencies, right?
Mhm.
It's not necessarily made inroads, but you see it coming. And those, I mean, those things are visible no matter what industry, what function you're in. So those are great places. Those we call functional skills, technical skills. So that can be one important ingredient of your learning plan. So that's one. The other one, which is 1+1, is pick out a behavioral area because those have a lot longer shelf life than some of these other technical areas, right? I mean, if you have the ability to listen deeply, you'll be in fashion today, you're going to be in fashion 10 years down the line, maybe even more. If
Yeah.
you have the ability to counsel, if you have the ability to coach, if you have the type of personality and warmth where people lean on you for advisory, you'll be in fashion today, you'll be in fashion in 2030. These have a longer shelf life, right? So pick one behavioral area. It could be stakeholder management, whatever it is, right? 1+1. That's your learning plan for the year. And that's what we're saying in the book. One technical area, and don't confuse yourself about, oh, what's going to be cool in the future. What is it? What is important to your work today? Do that. Because in the process of doing that, like Vivek very rightly mentioned, what you're getting better at is this ability to learn. So you're almost that the ability to learn is the meta skill, is your insurance. Because no
Right.
matter what hits us, and we don't know what that's going to be 3, 4, 5 years down the line, you have a mechanism, and that's the whole idea of learn, do, share, and teach, where we are telling people, guys, learning once you're out of your business schools, your university programs, personal learning is no longer personal when you're in a business context.
Mhm.
Whatever you're learning has to unlock value for your business.
Mhm.
If you're a leader, you're going through a leadership program, your teams have to be better off, right?
Right.
It's not just you getting better, it's not an academic endeavor. And that's the mindset shift as people think about the transition from, let's say, the campus to corporate, as an example. It's no
Right.
longer personal. Everything you learn has to be of some value to a business, a context, a team. So you're learning, but you're also sharing. It could be an enterprise blog that you're learning your lessons, sharing your lessons on. You're also doing a lunch and learn. You're teaching because that's the best way to clarify things to yourself. So that's the whole approach. So you become thoughtful. You have a learning plan, the 1+1, technical, behavioral. You
Right.
think about how you're not only are you going to learn, you're going to share, you're going to teach. And when you're doing all of this, going back to your previous question, Vivek, you end up building influence. Because think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
look around, how many people do things like this? So if you do
Right.
this, you're obviously going to stand out and you will get a head start, which is
Yeah.
what we're hoping and wishing for everyone.
And
So
Vivek,
just treat learning as a muscle that you can just kind of keep exercising. I think back to your point, Vivek, right? Yeah.
and Vivek, Sundar's laid out quite well the need to prioritize some of the skills like learning, ability, curiosity, resilience, and adaptability, right? Which are the foundational ingredients of employability. But let me just build on that too, on this around this whole aspect of AI. Right? Because I think in many ways, we probably are underestimating the impact AI will actually have on jobs. And while there is certainly a lot of hype associated with it, but in some ways, I think the impact of AI will be even much larger than the impact we saw with the advent of the computer or the internet. And I
Right.
remember someone saying that you are less likely to lose your job to AI than to another human, which who's using
Using
AI,
it. Yeah.
especially if you don't, use AI yourself. And so I think
Right.
it's very important for everyone in this age of AI working alongside humans is to develop, what a lot of experts are calling fusion skills, which
Mm-hmm.
is fusing and effectively collaborating with AI systems. And there are probably three aspects to it. One aspect is what experts are calling intelligent interrogation, which is being able to actually ask AI the right questions or give it the right instructions. The
Mm-hmm.
second is what is being referred to as judgment interrogation, which is like knowing when to step in to be able to provide your judgment. And then the third is reciprocal apprenticing, which is teaching AI while learning from it. But I
Right.
think it's extremely important for all of us to now learn how to effectively learn and collaborate with AI systems. And if there's one skill set which we should probably all try to learn, it's coding skills, I think, and which I think, it might be a little bit too late for Sundar and I to become effective coders. But ultimately, I think we probably are underestimating the impact AI would have. And some of the, I think things which Sundar mentioned are critical foundational elements. Over that, we have to learn, each of us has to learn a way to effectively collaborate with AI systems.
Absolutely. I think you can't run away from AI. Of course, there's a contrarian view about coding nowadays because they're saying that, listen, previously we had to try and understand the language of the machines, but now the machines understand our language. So, you really don't have to, learn coding in that sense.
And it's not about coding in the language, it's about problem solving. I think
Yeah,
coding is
that's right.
the way to solve problems. As Sundar was saying, look, we ultimately have to learn how to solve problems, regardless of what the language or the system of the day is.
Right. In fact, just coming to that point, uh, prompt engineering itself, I mean, the way you pose the question has become so important. And in fact, like I was sharing with you over the weekend, one of the AI builders was telling us that, you know what, if you really want to kind of get a more nuanced answer from your chat GPT, try talking to it. Because when you talk to it, it just gathers so much more information because what is otherwise a one-line prompt ends up being a much more nuanced prompt that the GPT kind of, gets in. So yeah, I think just working with machines is going to be a very fascinating stuff. I'm just going to stop now and I'm just going to double down these questions because this is really overflowing right now. And I think we won't be doing justice if we don't pick up these questions. So in no particular order, and I'm just going to try and come up with this. So Aman is saying that how does one handle career setbacks or tough decisions, especially career setbacks? Because you're trying to build your career, something goes bad, you probably get laid off. Any thoughts on that?
Sundar, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the way you handle is to I mean, one, I would say, please read the sixth section of the book. I think when you walk up
Nice.
with the recognition that it's a 40-year game, right? So automatically, it's easy for me to say, hey, you know what, just have perspective, right? And that can be esoteric.
Yeah.
Again, we are big fans of deconstructing things down into things which are actionable. So
Mhm.
if you have a setback and then you suddenly tell yourself, hey, you know what, this is going to be 4 decades, right? As an example. So if I have a bad quarter, a bad 6 months, a bad year, what percentage is that of your overall journey? So one of the things we're saying in our book is there's no one mistake that's going to break your career. There's no one success that's going to ensure sustained success over the next 30 years, right? So
Right.
it's all right. I think if you have a setback, see if there's a lesson to be extracted. Not always though, because I think the other piece that we see a lot of, and we've made this mistake, I've made this mistake, looking for a lesson in every failure,
Mhm.
right? And
Sometimes it just is a bad day.
sometimes you just have to
Bad.
accept, look, I tried, it didn't work out, I wasn't good enough. That's it, move on. I mean, don't try to massage the lesson out of it, and
Yeah.
it's all right, right? I think just having that perspective to say not everything you try is going to work. So if you have a setback, fair enough, pick yourself, move on. Uh, what is it? 6 months, 1 year, 3 months, 2 years? You'll bounce back. And this is not philosophical. I mean, look around you. There are so many people who've probably thought, wow, this is the last nail on my coffin in terms of my career. And then suddenly they resurrect and they have such glorious time ahead. So I think it's just a question of just telling yourself that this is the long game. If you have a setback, it's all right. Just normalizing the whole
Right.
narrative around setbacks just makes
Right.
the coping mechanism easy.
Yeah. So I think that's a great feedback to all the youngsters watching this podcast that you don't have to convert every setback into a LinkedIn post. Sometimes shit just happens, right? And yeah. So there's another question here saying that how do you approach making high stakes decisions under uncertainty? Any frameworks or mental models that you swear by? Vivek, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think Vivek, as you were, the question alludes to it, is there are a lot of what I call no regret moves. There are certain lots of small decisions, but then there are those larger decisions. I think we sometimes tend to overthink the smaller decisions and don't spend enough time on the bigger decisions. So one is obviously the clarity, being able to figure out what is a small decision versus a big decision, where the stakes might be actually high. And the way, I approach some of these big decisions, whether it's at a personal level or at a business level, is first of all to essentially frame the opportunity, so to speak. I think a lot of people struggle with not being able to truly frame the
Mhm.
opportunity. I think framing and structuring it probably is a very underrated skill. But the first one is
Mhm.
to really actually have a sense of framing the opportunity, understanding the pros and the cons, understanding the upsides and the downside, and then finding a way to actually elevate the upside and find a way to actually negate the downsides.
Mhm.
And it requires preparation, it requires some analysis, it requires talking to a few people, it requires trying to make this as objective as possible. And then,
Mhm.
along with objectivity, it's important to try and put a certain amount of conviction and instinct, behind it. Uh,
Mhm.
Usually, if you have the luxury, you can prepare some scenarios, right? You can prepare some risk mitigation approaches, which may or may not be able to happen. And sometimes you can even try and have backup plans. But again, that's not always feasible. And then, in spite of your best efforts, sometimes things will not work out. Shit does happen. And so you have to learn and be able to move on. But there is a structured approach to being able to look at
Mhm.
quantifying and understanding the various risks. And in
Mhm.
the book, we talk about this idea of inversion thinking, which Charlie Munger, who used to work with Warren Buffett, had
Mhm.
talked about, which is sometimes it actually helps figuring out what's the worst that can happen, right? And
Right.
then look at the downsides to be able to focus on the upside. So there are a bunch of, I think, mental models
Mhm.
that are actually available, but one has to recognize that sometimes things may not work out, and if that doesn't happen, learn from it and be move on in your 40-year career journey, as Sundar was mentioning.
Mm. Nice. There's a question here from Samir. I think it's a very interesting one. He said, when deciding to enter a workplace, what factors should a person look at? How much focus should he really place on, let's say, the manager, the company, the culture? Uh, what are the ex-employees saying? Any thoughts? I mean, you basically it's just saying that look, I think you got to look beyond the paycheck and the title, right? So, any thoughts on that? Maybe Vivek, you could have a shot at it, and then Sundar.
Yeah, nothing beats actually doing enough diligence beforehand. The first important thing I think, Vivek, is to actually know who you are, right?
Mhm.
What your strengths are to the extent possible, and what will give you meaning in taking on any role. As you mentioned, a lot of us get extremely seduced by titles and compensation. And look, compensation is important, titles are important. We all have a
Of
need for
course.
validation. But
Mhm.
don't make it a number one reason. It's okay for it to be a number three or a number four reason, but
Mhm.
actually do enough groundwork and gather enough intelligence to truly understand the company, understand the culture, if there's some ways you can find out about the boss, I think that's good to get prepared, right?
Mm,
But even if you're prepared, it's very important to go in with an open mind. The first few years are about, are about learning. And in the
mhm,
first few years, you have to give more than what you receive, I think. That equation is never, the giving is not equal to taking in the first few years. You just have to be learn to work harder. You will have to do those weekends, those long hours. There's no
mm,
substitute for grind in the early years because you're also learning and the company is also making an investment. And so I think, people do get very frustrated. They talk about work-life balance, they talk about boundaries. Those are important things, but the first few years, I think you have to be more of a giver,
mm,
than a taker. So you have to go in with, you can do all the preparation in the world, but then you have to go in with humility, with an open mind, saying, look, I'm going to learn. I'm going to try and do the best job I can, and hopefully the results will come over time. So, I think the question here, yeah, it's important to understand the manager, understand the role, check the Glassdoor reviews, talk to lots of people. But the important thing is to actually, not every job or every role is right for a particular individual. So
mm.
it might be a great role for Sundar. It actually may not be the right role for me. It's not
Right.
as if every single role is completely fixed. It's so contextual again. So one has to do the groundwork to figure out, look, is this the right role for me? Is this the company that will actually help bring out the best in me? Will I get rewarded fairly? Will I get to learn? Those are some of
Mhm.
the questions I think each of us, it's very important for us to be able to answer.
Yeah. Sundar, Vivek spoke a lot about giving a lot more than you're getting, especially in the earlier years, right? What do you have to say about this whole, may I say, controversy or noise around the 70-hour work week that we've been listening to over the last few months?
Well, the only thing I can say is I'm not working 70 hours a week. you know. So yeah, look, I think to each his own. I think it's difficult to be prescriptive on things like these because it all depends on
Mm,
if it's your own. You're an entrepreneur. It's your own company. You may be working 100 hours a week. Who knows? I mean, as long as if that's making you thrive, who's anyone else to question that? Of course, I mean what Mr. Murthy said was in a different context, and I'm sure it makes for good social conversations. But
mm,
I don't have a I'm not going to quantify and say X hours is right or Y hours is right. I
right.
think it all depends on your context, the stage of life you're at, all of those things, right? Just on your previous question, I do want to quote something again interesting from the book, which is actually an advice one of my mentors gave and features in the book. And he said that look, at any given point in time, because the question was around, is there a formula of picking the right company, right? What percentage is boss and what percentage is culture and so on and so forth. And he said, at any point in time, there's always one person joining the company and one person leaving the company. And both the fellows think that they've made the best decision of their life,
Yeah.
right? I think therein lies the answer. So I think don't overcomplicate it. Don't worry. The
Mm,
one of the mistakes I've made and I've learned now is every job I've gone into, I've only realized that I have a lot more agency than I think I do,
mm,
right? So it's very easy to give up the ropes and say, oh, you know what, it's not working out because it's the culture is like that, the boss is like that, the system is conspiring against me, I'm not set up for success. Only to realize, having made those mistakes, looking back, realize, hey, you know what, I had a lot more going for me. If I had just
right.
given myself the agency to go and design things,
Mm,
to set myself up for success versus just complaining. So cribbing less, whining less, and just doing more would have produced better results. In some of those situations where I thought the system is not designed to make me succeed. So sometimes you also have to create that balance to say, what if this is just personal ownership versus
mm,
truly the environment not working for you?
yeah. Sundar, you touched upon the point of your mentor, and would love to hear your view and also, Vivek's view about, how important is mentorship and how does one really go about seeking it?
I
Sundar,
think
go ahead.
super important. And easy the way you seek anything else. It can be a cold email. It could be a Teams call, it could be you putting your hand up. And I think a simple way to look at it, because the moment you say coaches, mentors, you go into semantics, it can again get confusing for somebody starting out. Simple thing. I'm a young professional, I'm a mid-stage professional, I'm doing a certain type of a role in a certain type of a company. Look around. I mean, there are people who are doing their jobs really well. There are people who are showing up really well. There are leaders who you see in action and you're like, wow, I mean, I wish I had that going for me. So role models. Role models are easy to spot because those are very demonstrable behaviors. So look for role models in your environment and make a list of 3 4 5 people who you have learned to appreciate for different things that they bring to the table. Reach out to them. All you have to do, and this is what I used to think. I always used to think in the early years of my career that I'm never going to get a response to a cold email if I write to a senior person.
Mhm.
I've been proven wrong. 9 out of 10 times I've written to somebody very senior in the headquarters, sometimes even in the board, and they've made the time. I've actually been more surprised to say, oh my gosh, now this person's actually ended up giving me the time. What do I do now? Right? Because I wasn't expecting, I thought I've just sent an email and suddenly the board members responded saying, yeah, let's do 30 minutes next time around.
Right.
Now I'm worrying about, oh my gosh, now I have to prepare. Right? So, and now that some of us have the good fortune of being in leadership, we do exactly the same. I mean, if I get a request from anybody, if it's a management trainee and they say they want 20 minutes with me, I'm never saying no, I'll find the time. It's almost like a call
Absolutely.
of duty, right? Because we are where we are because there were so many people who were nice to us, not because we were the smartest. They were just kind to us, they cared for us. And then it becomes a duty to say, I'm going to offer the same to anyone else who finds me worthwhile spending time with. Right? So I think it's that just reach out, write that email, make that phone call. Your 90% success rate. What more can you ask?
Right. So just reach out. I think for all of them watching on this, I mean, just reach out. You don't need to have apprehension. You'll just be surprised that how willing people are there to really have a conversation. Vivek, any thoughts on the same point?
Yeah, for me, I really believe, and we talk in the book about this idea of a personal board of advisors, right? So
Mm.
find 3 or 4 or 5 people who can help you in different aspects. It might be careers, it might be investment advice, it might be, health advice, but finding people who are really looking out for you, that's very important. Vivek, I sometimes find that people suddenly want mentors when they're looking for a job, right? So, uh, you have to build the relationship and you have to create the right enabling context, right?
Right.
Difficult for a mentor to really add value if you haven't stayed in touch with the mentor. So, the most important thing is, first of all, find people who really care about you. Second of all, invest in the relationship. Investing in the relationship actually means scheduling regular conversations. If the person is very difficult to meet, then send them a message every month saying, hey, haven't had a chance to meet. Here are 3 or 4 things that are happening in my life. Third of all, I think it's very important that whenever you have a mentoring conversation, be prepared. Go in with even an email beforehand which says, looking forward to meeting with you. Here are 2 issues that I'm wrestling with. I would love to get your advice in terms of what those issues are. Once the meeting is over, follow up again saying, thank you very much. Here are my takeaways. Next time when we meet, I will have made progress in these areas. And the
Right.
final piece of advice I give is again, it has to be a two-way relationship, right? I learned as much as I from my mentees as my people who I am mentoring, right? So it's very important to be able to find ways to again give. It should not be a one-way relationship. So I think there is again in the book we talk a lot about this. There is again a structured approach to being able to cultivate proactively mentoring relationships. If one
Mhm.
can find the right mentors, it can absolutely be be game changing.
Right. Vivek, you've actually been in consulting, the startup, FMCG, been across, and I think you could really answer this question well. He said, when professional transition between industries, how should they position the experience to stay competitive and relevant? This is a question from Jenny.
Yeah. Look, one is at the end of the day, this is part of the learning journey, right? So even if you're changing industries, right?
Mhm.
The one thing you have to remember is that when somebody is giving you a job, right? they actually know that you do not have the necessary industry experience if you're joining a new industry. And all of us suffer from imposter syndrome. So the first starting step is to actually know the person who's hiring you knows that, right? And they've made the choice to hire you in spite of the lack of whatever experience other people might have. And so you clearly have a lot more things going for you in spite of your lack of experience. So starting again from a position of, I think, self-belief and conviction is very important. The second is there will always be a honeymoon period. And in that period, you just have to work much better and faster to go up the learning curve. So everybody will give you a certain amount of time to learn, but patience is never infinite, right? So people are
True.
going to expect you to jump the learning curve very quickly. In that process, I think it's very important to actually ask for help. Again, people know that you don't necessarily have that experience. So, actually being able to ask for help, reaching out to your peers is very important. And then the fourth is in this journey, find some, it sounds cliched, find those low hanging fruit, find some early wins. Those early wins both build credibility and also boost our confidence. But I think there's again a structured approach people can use to be able to navigate industry or transitions.
Right. Vivek touched upon this whole imposter syndrome. Sundar, you have any comments on that?
No, I mean, look, it sneaks up on all of us, even while you're writing the book, right? You're always questioning yourself. So I think the one piece of recommendation we'd like to share with fellow professionals is you never really beat it, right? We talk about coping mechanisms in the book because these are things that come through no matter where you are, what stage of life you're at. So as long as you build a toolkit, as long as you build the awareness, so when you're in self-doubt, if you can catch yourself in that moment, so that you stop yourself going down that rabbit hole. And simple things that we're saying in the book as well, right? One, please don't use harsh language for yourself. Uh, now when we look back, we almost get in our own way, right? Tearing ourselves down and things like that. So I think can we all be kinder to ourselves? That's number one. Number two, one of the tools that we talk about in the book is, have a folder on your mailbox and call it whatever you want to call it. We are recommending call it the appreciation folder. So every time you get a positive nudge from a team member, a boss, a client, a customer, what have you, file it, right? As narcissistic as it may sound, when you have a bad day, when you're doubting yourself, when you're not in your zone, just go have a look at those emails and suddenly you realize, hey, you know what? I own today. Today wasn't a good day, didn't work out. Today, this wasn't a good week, didn't work out. But this is also me. This is me who was recognized for all these wonderful things I've done over the years. So it'll again bring a sense of balance. So don't be tools help. So don't be judgmental. Don't intellectualize it. Some of these things work. Go if that fills you up with some confidence. It gives you the energy to go fight another day and build things back, right? So simple things like that. But if you're going through self doubt, it's normal. Again, the narrative that we want to normalize, it's all right. We go through it. We asked ourselves the question, Vivek and I asked ourselves the question, who are we to be giving all this advice? Right? Does the world need another career book? So it's normal. It's totally okay. We deal with this better today than we dealt earlier. So as long as you can build those mechanisms, you'd be fine.
I think we are up on the hour already, but I think before you guys go, just would love to, this is a round of rapid fire questions put together by my team, largely, a team of Gen Z and millennials. So I'm just going to shoot them out and just give me whatever thought just comes to your mind. Yeah. So I'll start with Vivek and then you, right? So the most underrated skill in a workplace, Vivek?
Listening.
Sundar?
Listening again. Second.
Okay. What's harder, writing a book or leading a team?
Leading a team, no contest. A book doesn't have egos or opinions.
All right.
Sundar? Writing a book in the way that you have to feel narcissist enough to actually think that you can write a book and then bring that to life, right? So there's a lot of more internal work in writing a book than leading a team.
I have a follow-up question on that. I'll just wait till the end of this. If you could swap jobs with anyone for a day, who would it be?
I've been getting very fascinated with escape rooms these days. So I love those folks, those designers who design escape rooms.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think
Sundar?
it'll be, some political figure. One part of me keeps telling me, hey, you know what, politics is an interesting space to be. So would love to
Well,
be in office, see what that
you want to
feels.
change the country, you have to be there, right? Finally, in that sense. Yeah. What's worse, Monday mornings or late Friday deadlines?
Uh,
For me, Friday deadlines for sure.
Same here, late Friday deadlines, and now we have Monday morning actions to help all of us,
All right. If you could time travel, would you visit the past or the future, and what would that be?
I think I'd just stay right here. The past has already taught us what we need. Revisiting it won't change anything. And the future, not knowing is half the excitement.
That's an author's answer. Come on, Vivek. No, but may makes sense completely. Sundar?
No, I'd love to jump ahead, see what's ahead, and then come back and fix things now.
Yeah, just
Fix things,
figure out,
yeah.
know where to make those bets, right? I mean, that would be interesting. If you could switch lives with a celebrity for a day, who would it be?
Uh, I've always been fascinated with David Attenborough. I love the shows he has narrating all those wildlife scenes
Yes,
and
yes,
exploring the most incredible places on earth.
right. Sundar?
Like I said, I mean, I've been fascinated with, what, life in office of a political leader looks like. So I don't know if, I could probably live in the shoes of Mr. Modi for a day. That'll be very fascinating. And
That would be fascinating, right? Running a billion people, that would be fascinating, right? In fact, the follow-up question I wanted to ask you, how difficult was it to get together as two, I would say friends, to put this book together? I'm sure you've had your share of differences, like it happens when you're building a company, and sometimes these are pretty bad that you end up probably splitting, somebody walks out. So just kind of walk us through this. I mean, how was the process, and did you have any tough moments?
Yeah, luckily there were no fireworks as such.
Mhm.
Just good old-fashioned healthy debates. I think we brought our own perspectives. We gave each other open feedback, and honestly, we learned a lot from one another because there was so much respect. And when we disagreed, the big acid test question was, what's best for the reader? And as it turns out, I think that question is such a great referee. And the minute we said, look, what would the reader really, what's most important for the reader? Things became actually quite easy, and we did certainly had lots of differences, but we found common ground, I think, Vivek.
But
So,
I just I'm sort of double clicking. I know where you probably were going with that question in terms of there's a lesson in there, right? I think the differences is what makes the product eventually work out well, right? I mean, just to give you a very specific, if I had my way, probably the book would only have 5 sections, so we would have finished at being a go-getter, as an example, right?
right,
But Vivek's strong point of view about, look, at the end of the day, this is a marathon, right? And that
right.
has actually ended up turning up to be one of our best sections, right? Which is to say, be the marathon runner, think long term and such,
Right.
because that advisory is not easy to digest when you're 25 or 30,
That's right.
right?
That's right.
But that's so important. It just sort of balances out everything. So I think having those different viewpoints, depending on what you're bringing to a particular project, a company, a team, is so important. So healthy level of friction, as long as it's governed by an outcome. And I think with a book, the easy piece is you're doing a book, you need to finish the book, you need to get it out. So I think, and you can argue you have similar tangible outcomes when you are running a business or doing anything else, right? So as long as you have that goal in mind and you have that mutual respect for each other, I think it's great to actually have differences, because that just enhances the final quality.
Lovely. And just to kind of bring this to a close, what's the best career or leadership advice you've ever received, and how has it influenced you? And as a follow-up question, what's that one piece of advice you'd like to leave behind for the listeners on this pod? Vivek?
So Sundar, go ahead. Sundar has this wonderful line that he's always used, I think, and I love to also hear that from him. Yes.
No, no, no. So, I mean, this is an advice that somebody who I respected a lot, spent 40 years with the same company, retired. And I asked him the same question that, look, what has 40 years in this fantastic global company taught you? And his one liner was, remember, you're not so important. So don't take yourself too seriously. Right? So that's really
And,
stayed.
and would that be the advice you'd want to kind
Oh
of give to
yeah,
the list?
I wish that for myself because sometimes I think most of it, at least in my life, right? I mean, most of the professional problems I've had or challenges are because of this false notion of oh, I'm so important, right? And the moment I'm able to break that, it just becomes easier. It's all right if you don't get the attention. It's all right. Sometimes you don't get the promotion. It's all right. It'll happen, right?
Right.
Classic example. Vivek and I have been writing for over. I mean, I started writing in 2006. Vivek's been writing for much longer. The books only happened now.
Yeah.
So I think it's all right. Things take time and they'll happen.
Right. I think one thing that I keep hearing from you as a recurring theme is really about think of the long play. I mean, don't get, whether it's about a bad day, whether it's about, getting somewhere, whether about succeeding, just have the long play. And then I think everything falls into perspective, right? That-
I mean, I think that somebody said it. I mean, last man standing is a strategy almost.
That's right. That's right. Right. Vivek, over to you.
Yeah, I think my only advice would be is, careers are not a linear journey,
Right.
right? There are going to be these inevitable bumps, detours. Sometimes you'll have to take these slingshots as we talk in the book. It's important to keep on believing in yourself. And while you're playing the long game, it's important to keep on learning because playing the long game without learning and relearning and actually taking different actions won't give the results to you. But I think to me, I think there is nothing like a career ladder anymore. Whether
Right.
it's a lattice, whether it's a zigzag, you can have different kinds of words describing it. But I think it's just important to embrace the journey, keep on learning and believing in yourself. And ultimately, for some of us, results come quicker. For some of us, results might take a little bit longer to happen.
All right. I think with that, Vivek and Sundar, thank you so much for coming on this talk. I really enjoyed our conversation and our dialogue and loved the way you kind of took some of those questions. Thank you so much. Wish you the very best with your book. And I really look forward to having you both back on the talk one of these days. Yeah.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much for having us, Vivek. All the very best. Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you,
Thank you
Vivek.
so much. All right. Bye-bye.